12 hours after taking off from Heathrow, we descended through the low clouds over the Yellow Sea, and I got my first glimpse of a country that has long been on my list of places to go. Thanks to some impulsive flight booking and opportunistic airfares, I found myself with 3 days in Seoul, the capital of the Republic of Korea. After my trip last year to Japan, this was a chance to explore the Far East some more and perhaps compare notes and preconceptions I have of Korea. First impressions though were not the best. As someone who doesn't have one of the special passports that lets me use the automated gates on entry, immigration at Incheon was a drawn out affair for seemingly little reason. This is not unique to Korea but would contrast to how Japan have streamlined their system. It's more like what Japan was when I went the first time. The slowness continued as we got on the alleged express train into Seoul. Don't do this unless, like me, you have no cash or intend to get a T-Money card. And the express ticket machines are the only ones in all of Korea that accept foreign cards, so you're kind of forced onto it. I mean, it's fine, it's just not worth the cost, and I may use the experience for a rant I want to make at some point about airport express trains. But these hiccups were soon forgotten as I arrived at the festively decorated Seoul Station. As I would find, Korea's largest religion is actually Christianity, so Christmas is very much celebrated here, a contrast to its neighbours to the east and west. Seoul Station is a modern hub as you would expect, though outside we find the old station building from 1925, which is now a cultural centre. Nearby is the first of what will be a recurring theme over the next few days. We find a statue to one of the many Koreans who resisted Japanese occupation in the first half of the 21st century. On this spot in 1919, Kang attempted to assassinate the newly appointed Japanese Governor General of Korea. His grenade missed the governor and Kang was executed in Seodaemun Prison, which we will visit in a few days. Walking towards our hotel near Myeongdong, we passed the landmark Namdaemun Gate, the Gate of the Exalted Ceremonies, or more commonly known as Namdaemun, or the South Gate. The gate was part of the ancient city walls completed in 1398, and up to 2008 was the oldest wooden structure in Seoul. In 2008 though, a disgruntled landowner set fire to the pagoda, destroying it. Over the next 5 years, the structure will be rebuilt following the original method, giving the current appearance of Korea's #1 national treasure. Bit of a contrast with the extremely modern city surrounding it. You know, one structure was only built in 2013, so it might be newer than some of the buildings around it. I dropped my bags off at the cupboard that I was staying in for the next few days. As someone who doesn't mind small rooms, the other facilities, great price and excellent location more than made up for the small room, and is still larger than a capital. Despite being awake at this point for over 24 hours, I took advantage of the central location and went out for a wander, passing the City Hall Plaza with nice rings set up for the winter, and eventually landing at Cheonggyecheon. The stream had been filled in during the 20th century and had a road built on top of it, but in 2005 this was removed and a new park following the stream was opened, and nearly instantly has become one of the most popular areas of the city, with the winter illuminations at this point drawing crowds. I quickly learned that Seoul does not do illuminations by half, even if a good number of these are advertisements for something or other. Look, if you're going to advertise me, at least make it pretty. After the park I wandered the nearby streets and alleys, mainly just taking in the bright signs and Friday night crowds. Overall, this has been a really cool introduction to Korea. Despite however long I had been awake, my body decided that 3 AM was an excellent time to wake up, so we were out earlier than expected to do some wandering before the city really woke up. This was the start of a major mistake I was making with my scheduling, which revolved around the fact that many places were closed on Monday, and I may have thought that I would be on an excursion on Monday. This excursion was actually happening on Tuesday, so yeah, see how well that's about to work out. Even with my sleep cycle being out of whack, I was still probably doing better than the people who were here last night. That's a pretty respectable score. And as we walk over the strange mats in City Hall Station that generate electricity from your footsteps, a practical note on getting around Seoul. For the next few days I'll be using the subway and bus a ton, as I usually do, and I would use the climate card to do so. It's a bargain. I got 3 days of unlimited travel for about £6 when you add in the cost of the card and ATM fees to actually load it. There's a lot of drivel online about talking about it and the T-Money card, which is a transfer card in a similar vein to the IC cards in Japan. The question gets asked, which one should you use? And for me the answer is simply climate card for Seoul, and then get a T-Money card if you're leaving Seoul. It isn't more complicated than that, that's it, that's the answer. The downside is that the climate card is not commonly found where you would expect it, say, I don't know, airports and train stations. I happened to find mine in this convenience store next to the Lot department store while walking back from Cheonggyecheon. So set with unlimited travel and some time to kill, we went south of the River Han to the corner of the Olympic Park where there is the World Peace Gate, built with the rest of the park for the 1988 Olympic Games. It's an impressive, colourful structure, and I'm sure the plaza would look pretty neat if it wasn't under refurbishment. Oh well. The next stop was meant to be more time killing, except I found something interesting so I had to stop by. Being the second largest religion, Buddhist temples are not uncommon in Korea, and in an otherwise very modern part in Gangnam, we find the impressive Bongeunsa Temple. Consisting of several halls over an expansive hillside park, a Buddhist temple has been here since 794, though the status of Buddhism has varied over the last 1200 years, from being nearly entirely suppressed to this temple becoming one of the 14 major temples of the Korean Empire. Fire in 1939 and the Korean War destroyed most of the temple, but it has been fabulously rebuilt and even features a 23-meter tall statue of Maitreya, the future Buddha. This was the start of a day of admiring traditional Korean architecture, which apparently I couldn't get enough of. As I mentioned, we are now in Gangnam, which I'm sure the locals have their own stereotypes about, but for 99% of people outside of Korea, it's known for the once most viewed video on the internet, Gangnam Style. The light-hearted days of 2012 are a distant memory, but Gangnam doesn't forget its moment of worldwide fame, with a large statue commemorating what was unbelievably the first K-pop song to actually get traction outside of Korea. And in a big way. The Korean Ministry of Culture even awarded Psy the 4th Class Order of Cultural Merit for this effort. I even spoke to a Korean later on this trip who happened to be going to Gangnam at the time, and he used the horse dance as his way of describing where he was going. You know, Gangnam, like the song. Yeah, crazy to think that this was the introduction to modern Korea for most people of my age. You gotta give it to him. I found they do like a weird building here. They got these like parasols over where you'll be standing for the crosswalks here. That's very interesting. I've never seen that anywhere. I don't know what conditions I have to bring him out. Maybe, I don't know if it's sun or rain. Probably sun. Probably a summer thing. That's crazy. What's also crazy is that Gangnam has a K-pop road, which is meant to be their version of the Hollywood Walk of Fame. This makes sense as Gangnam is the centre of the K-pop industry, mainly by virtue of being full of rich people, but what's even crazier is that Red Velvet are non-existent here, thus discrediting this entire effort. Try harder, Gangnam. Given that the city had woken up at this point, it was time to get a bus across the river, which is always a neat thing to do, to start from what would turn into a cultural hike. But before we get into ancient culture, we got to witness modern Korean culture, as we see a property dispute of some sort, tangentially involving a local mayor. I've no clue who's right or wrong here, but it's amusing to have passed by. I'm assuming those balloons are also some sort of protest. Maybe it's just a thing to do on a Sunday. Anyway, there's a famous shrine in there. Yes, that famous shrine is Jongmyo Shrine, where the members of the Joseon dynasty, who ruled Korea from the 14th century to Japanese occupation, are memorialized. The shrine has the dual purpose of housing the spirit tablets of Korean kings and queens, and being the venue of the Jongmyo Jeri, a traditional rite to worship the deceased royals. This ceremony is still performed on the first Sunday of May and first Saturday of November by descendants of the Korean royal family, and is included on UNESCO's list of intangible cultural heritage. The ritual has its basis in Confucianism traditions, and the layout of the shrine, and indeed the entire palace complex of the Joseon dynasty, are based on Confucian principles. It is located on this site so that it would be to the left of the throne at the main palace of Gyeongbokgung. While grand, the shrine is simply decorated, underscoring the solemnity of the state shrine. The footpath here has 3 parts. The left side is for the crown prince, the right is for the king, and the centre is reserved for the spirits, which the shrine would like if you still respected this tradition. The main hall of Jongmyo is the longest traditional style building in Korea and contains 49 spirit tablets of Joseon kings and queens. A second hall, Namdaemun, was later built and contains a further 34 tablets, including that of the last crown prince and princess of Korea, who were enshrined in 1973 and 1991. Walking to the north side of the shrine, the path leads directly to Changgyeoonggyng Palace. The palace was built in the 15th century and was the residence for queens, concubines and princes. Like most of the royal palaces we will see, the buildings we see today are the result of extensive restoration and rebuilding over the last 50 years or so. This palace was nearly totally destroyed by the Japanese, who built a zoo and botanical garden here, in an attempt to have a Korean equivalent to Ueno Park in Tokyo. The neighbouring palace of Changdeokgung was spared most of the same fate by virtue of being the residence of the last Korean monarch, who continued to live here in effective house arrest after the Japanese formally annexed Korea. It also dates from around the 15th century, but is notable for having several modern interiors on display, reflecting its use as a royal residence into the 20th century. And also that the Japanese didn't tear it down at some point, which they did on a massive scale to the first and largest of the Joseon palaces, Gyeongbokgung. This huge palace complex once had over 500 buildings, but after 1910 the Japanese sold off most of them, leaving around only 40 original buildings by 1945. And to add insult to injury, they had built the headquarters of the colonial government on the site. And also this was the site of the assassination of Queen Min by Japanese agents in 1895. Yeah, the Koreans are really making sure that you're made well aware of the many atrocities committed against them, especially by the Japanese. Since the 80s, 89 buildings have been restored on this site, and a further 90 will be rebuilt by 2045. The palace is one of the main landmarks of Seoul and of perhaps Korea itself, being central to one of the main dynasties of Korean history. As expected, it is very popular with tourists, many of whom take advantage of the fact that wearing traditional Korean dress gives you free entry to any royal palace in Seoul. Not that the renting the clothes is cheaper than the admission tickets, which are actually not expensive at all, but you know, it's more fun this way. Doesn't really work in December, does it? Aside from misplaced sundials, the palaces are very impressive and novel to the European eye, and are a credit to the many people who have worked to restore and preserve Korean history. Embracing Korean tradition, lunch was Teokbokki, a dish I'd never heard about until about 5 minutes before it was served to me, and is straight into the best things I found in Korea. It is rice cakes, which are like big tubes of pasta, and I thought they were pasta until I learned later they're rice, in a spicy sauce with various vegetables alongside. It's served piping hot, or in this case, freshly simmered on the table, which will be a theme of this trip overall. Highly recommended, alongside basically any Korean food, you can't go wrong. Nearby I also found this eye-catching sculpture. Called the Humanise Wall, it is part of the 2025 Seoul Architectural Biennial and features images of buildings from around the world with the message of stop building boring buildings and, well, humanize them. There are also other architecture installations in the park along the same theme, and it seems fitting to have this in Seoul, as our view from our next stop will really illustrate how bland most of the residential buildings in Seoul are. The Seoul Metro and the London Underground have very little in common. However, when it comes to the station underneath the government complex being architecturally interesting, that's actually common ground. Looking at the sky and doing a quick Naver map search, I quickly decided at this point to head southeast of central Seoul to the city's most famous modern landmark. The Korean peninsula in general is very mountainous, and the city of Seoul is no exception. Indeed, this is referenced in the artwork you can see in the throne rooms of the palaces we just visited. Namsan is one of the highest points in Seoul and is topped by the N Tower, a 236 tall transmission tower that can be seen from most of central Seoul. The name of the mountain literally means South Mountain, and in the past it was part of the southern boundary of the city, and you can still see the city wall snaking its way over the mountain. It is now one of the largest park areas in Seoul and is a way to literally get yourself above the near endless sprawl of the city below, with buildings as far as the eye can see, with only other mountains breaking up the city. The N Tower has been on this site since 1971, originally built to block North Korean TV and radio signals, and later had an observation deck added, and over the years the summit has been made into a proper tourist attraction with viewing decks, shops, restaurants and Korea's first cable car, which is extremely popular, hence I went with the cheaper and possibly more comfortable and convenient bus. The bus also drops you right back at Namdaemun, so it was perfect for getting back to the hotel as well. In terms of timing, this was about perfect to catch the sun just starting to set over the city, right before the big crowds showed up. While the tower and its surroundings are somewhat of a tourist trap, you get the view in the right weather and, this might be one of those cases where the hordes are onto something. Look, Hokkaido. I'm going there next week. Day 2 was another early start, thanks to passing out in my room at about 6 PM yesterday. It seems that the feel of a city early on a Monday morning is universal, with alleys that were bustling a few hours ago now empty, save for a few shopkeepers and delivery men and even the local shoe shiner who resided in a cosy little hut in one of the alleys near my hotel. We were getting a bus out to the northwestern boundary of the city of Seoul, which in itself was interesting to see what most of the region actually looks like once you get out of the high rises and grandeur of the centre. Yep. Feels like most cities, though I did come across some interesting recycling.
Not sure what's going on here, but it seems to have made like half his shop out of plastic buckets. Well, that's one way of recycling. How fascinating.
The reason we gone well off the tourist trail, especially at this time in the morning, was to find one of Seoul's hidden gems, though thanks to the internet even like idiots like me can find them now. Suguksa is one of the most striking temples in Seoul, not for its scale but for the fact it has a golden sanctum that literally glows in the sun. Coming early seems to have been the winner as the rising sun lit up the front of the building and the modest temple grounds. A temple has been here on the side of Bongsan Mountain since 1459 and was later designated as the guardian temple for the nearby royal tombs. That's when it got the name of Suguksa, which means the temple that protects the country. It was destroyed by fire and left to decay, but in 1900 it was rebuilt. The crown prince had fallen ill, and King Gojang asked the monk Woo-Kyu to pray for him. The prince recovered, and the impressed king wanted to reward the monk with gold. The modest monk refused, but instead asked for a temple to be rebuilt for all the people to visit. And so instead of getting physical gold, the first and only golden sanctum in Korea was built. While not the largest, this quiet, well-kept and welcoming temple was one of the most impressive that I have visited in Asia. On the way back into the city, I stopped by Seodaemun Independence Park. Even before full annexation, the park was a centre of the Korean independence movement. As this road is the road to Beijing, Chinese envoys would meet with Korean officials here. In the late 19th century, the original gate here was torn down and an Independence Gate was built by the Independence Club to symbolise Korean independence from Chinese influence. This period though was short-lived, and growing interference from Japan led to the club to continue meetings and debates in what is now Independence Hall. Rebuilt as a memorial after Japanese occupation, the hall now houses the names of Koreans who died for the cause of independence. The park has numerous memorials to prominent activists and protest movements, including specifically of Yu Gwang-sun, who had a fairly short activist career but is one of the most famous symbols of the independence movement. After attending the March 1st protests in Seoul, the 16-year-old student returned to her home in Cheonan after the Japanese closed her school. There, she organised a rally of 3,000 people on April 1st, 1919, which was brutally put down by Japanese police, who killed 19 protesters, including her parents. Yu was arrested and imprisoned in Seodaemun Prison next to the current Independence Park. Here, she was tortured but never gave up her comrades, dying as a result of her injuries in 1920. Her death and resultant protests did result in some concessions by Japanese authorities, but mainly inspired a generation to keep fighting for Korean freedom. We would return to this area tomorrow, but for now, we enjoyed a Chilson cider, which I found was the Korean equivalent of a 7-Up, and we're about to have an interesting train ride.
And just for posterity, as I take a sit down over a pretty pleasant park, the train ride here was interesting, in that shortly after Seoul Station, which doesn't give a lot of time between here and Seoul Station, this guy sits down in the carriage, and his face is covered in blood, bruised to hell. He's clearly been in some sort of scuffle. And then he decides to sit down to me. And starts talking to me, realizing I can't speak Korean, so he speaks in English, which is actually pretty good. And we just have what turns out to be a pleasant chat about, yeah, I'm in Korea. Enjoying, having a few days. Yeah, I come from the UK. Yeah, UK is nice. Do I know about Yongsan? That's basically a big US military base and still a lot of Americans around there. It's like, yeah, he told me about getting off with a US soldier. It's like, oh, that's fun. In a club that apparently his friend owns, and yeah, and then somehow the police kicked his face in. Which, I mean, again, all of this, who knows how much was true, but it was an interesting story anyway. I mean, police very well could have kicked his face in, but it's interesting if they kicked his face in, given he was still covered in blood. So this would have recently happened, and here he is just sitting in the train. Not saying that perhaps the Seoul police may not have been as competent in keeping him under wraps or not, but I also see him, there's a decent chance he just fell up some stairs. And is just wandering the metro, apparently on his way to Gangnam, even though I'm not sure if you're going from there, you'd end up there. But yeah. The interesting things you find on a late morning on a subway seems to be universal. No matter where you go, you find interesting characters. Anyway, should we actually go and learn about Korea? Or at least learn more about Korea.
Indeed, we are now at the National Museum of Korea, which has an exhibition going through the history of the peninsula, from prehistoric times to the formation of the various kingdoms of Korea and eventually modern times, though the main exhibition is mainly focused on the more ancient history. The building itself is actually quite impressive, and in addition to the free main exhibition, it houses various temporary exhibitions too. For more modern history, there is the nearby War Memorial of Korea, which doubles as a memorial of the Korean War, and the National Military Museum. The obelisk with statues of Koreans at its base is the main monument of the Korean War, and the surrounding park has various smaller monuments and statues, mostly relating to the division of Korea. The large circular plaza in front of the Memorial Hall is surrounded by the flags of the United Nations who participated in the Korean War, and helped defend the Republic of Korea's independence. The plaza is surrounded on three sides by plaques with the names of those who died during the conflict. Inside the Memorial Hall itself is a darkened hallway that leads to a round room with a pool in the centre. And then the rest of the building is a museum describing the military history of the peninsula, with a natural focus on more modern conflicts that have shaped the Republic of Korea. Plenty of vehicles and military equipment are on show, with even a large outdoor park filled with various vehicles including a B-52 and a patrol ship that clearly has bullet holes from its encounter with North Korean forces. This is all very interesting to history and vehicle nerds, and I definitely recommend it, especially those who have, say, more limited knowledge of the Korean War, which is expanded on in detail here, and even Korea's participation in the Vietnam War, which got its own exhibition. However, the juxtaposition of the memorial part of the complex with the military museum may seem to give mixed messages to a Westerner who usually finds institutions go with either one direction or the other. War is either terrible and be thankful for the peace, or war isn't great but it makes a good story. But for my brief time in Korea, I think this reflects an attitude to war that is more hardened and pragmatic than we usually find in developed countries, at least as out in the open as it is in Korea. I guess this is the reality of living your life in range of hostile artillery that is just waiting in order to destroy you and everything you know. The Koreans don't have the luxury of hiding behind euphemisms and doublespeak. Skipping ahead, but tomorrow our tour guide to the DMZ, who is a former army major, was asked his view on North Koreans. And he forthrightly said that North Korean civilians are Koreans that need to be liberated. But the armed forces and government were the enemy. and he said that in a way that left no doubt that he would not hesitate to kill them if necessary. Not every Korean will be militaristic about reunifying the peninsula, and to be fair, our tour guide was not advocating for an offensive tomorrow to retake Pyongyang, but all Koreans, I believe, want peace and freedom with little to no bloodshed. However, there is the recognition that the military power of both Korea and its allies is what has allowed this country to exist and prosper, and this is not a topic of taboo, it is just a necessity of life here. As Yongsan has been home to a significant US military base since the Korean War, this part of Seoul has traditionally been the most popular with foreigners, so here we get to see an example of a place that must logically exist, but you've probably never thought about it. Like how a city might have a Chinatown or Koreatown, Itaewon is Seoul's western town, where you can get a kebab, a pint, and other western specialities that most viewers of this video probably take for granted. The footpaths even feature these nice little plates showing how to say hi in different languages, which I thought was a neat touch. We travel a bit further north to find one of the last traces of Japanese occupation in Yongsan, which helps tell the interesting story of this area. This stairway of 108 steps was built by the Japanese for access to the Shinto shrine that they had built near the military base. Locals were forced to attend daily prayers in an attempt to override Korean culture with Japanese. After 1945 the shrine was torn down, but the stairs remain, and during the Korean War many refugees from the north settled here, which I believe led to the area becoming known as Haebongchon or Freedom Village. Thanks to its proximity to the US base, it is popular with expatriates and is apparently trendy. Oh, and they obviously added a lift so you don't have to walk up the stairs anymore, which seems more in keeping with Korean culture. Heading back to the centre, I passed through one of Namdaemun's extensive markets, which feels like a place you get lost for hours, but I never really had the time to explore. However, I did have the time to go see the nighttime illuminations at Gwanghwamun. As part of the winter festivities here, there was a Christmas market and light shows, with the centrepiece being shows projected on the palace walls, which were probably interesting for all the cars driving by. Things had quieted down the next morning as I ventured out for what had become my traditional early morning gimbap breakfast. Like most Korean food, I had no idea what this really was until I got here, but I've been instantly sold on it. Also, if you are in Seoul and your sleep cycle is out of sorts thanks to a 9-hour time difference from home, Lebap are a Korean chain where you can get kimbap, Teokbokki and other Korean dishes 24 hours a day for reasonable prices, and that gets my seal of approval. Whether we were awake early or not, we had to be on Myeongdong early today to join a tour of the DMZ. While many people are aware of the existence of the DMZ and North Korea has a habit of regularly getting themselves into the news for the wrong reasons, it can get overlooked just how close the border is to Seoul. It took less than 40 minutes to get to Imjingak on the Imjin River. This is the start of the civilian restricted zone, where access is limited to those who have permits, such as us as part of a tour group. Here, at the south end of the Bridge of Freedom, where over 12,000 prisoners were exchanged after the armistice, there are various memorials, an information centre, a convenience store and a cable car. I'm not going to get over the cable car. Of the notable sites here, one that caught my attention was this altar. In Korea, it is important to be able to return to your home to perform ancestral rites at holidays through the years. For those who fled the north, that is no longer possible, so this altar was placed here, facing north, to give them a place to come to, and features tablets depicting the 7 northern provinces that are now North Korea. At the end of the original railway bridge, which was destroyed during the war, there is a steam train that was abandoned when it was overrun by Chinese forces. It stayed in place during the war, changing hands several times and being covered in over 1,200 bullet holes, and it is here as a visual reminder of the destruction of the war. Looking over the river, you can see the pillars of one of the 3 bridges that used to be here, and the modern railway bridge. In what seemed like a brief period of North-South cooperation, this railway connected the North Korean city of Kaesong to the south. Kaesong was a special joint industrial area where southern companies could establish factories here, and there was a regular stream of commuters to north of the border. However, in the 2010s, this cooperation ended as relations deteriorated, and now the border complex on the southern side sits unused. The road and railway to Kaesong now ends at the border, as the North have ripped up both on their side. Imjingak was interesting as a historical site, but also as a bit of a theme park, which South Korea seems to have no issue turning the DMZ into where they can.
It is interesting to turn one of the most militarized and contentious borders into the world into a literal tourist attraction and amusement park. But, I don't know, you gotta pay the bills somehow, I guess.
This attitude of merrily going about your day amongst the barbed wire and guard posts seems to be rubbing off on me and everyone else here, as what I'm sure was distant gunfire got zero reactions from anyone.
I'm hearing what sounds like gunfire in the distance. I have no idea if that's something that's happening here as part of, something in the tourist area here, or if that actually is distant gunfire from the coast, like heading down the estuary in the river. I don't know. That is pretty much a summary of the situation around here, that you hear something like that and you're more concerned about, hopefully they don't cancel the rest of the tour or something stupid. Yeah, on some hands, been quite blasé about the whole thing, but on the other hand, is that kind of what the situation deserves? So, I can get behind being a bit blasé.
If anyone knows if that was real or what that was, let me know. My guess is it was probably at a range at one of the nearby camps or barracks. We would see a few of those around as we headed north into the civilian restricted zone and towards the DMZ itself. After getting our passports checked, we crossed the Imjin River and made our way to the Dora Observatory, crossing the white line that marks the start of the DMZ, because nothing says demilitarized like driving along a road with minefields on either side. First time I've actually seen one of those, which is interesting. For most people, the Dora Observatory is the only place you will ever see the isolated country of North Korea with your own eyes. Though this clip is looking south, as filming facing north is strictly prohibited as of 2025, as let's just say that both sides are very busy building up defences along the border. Thanks to my guide, I can at least share some of what that looks like, as he had the foresight to take photos over a year ago before the current restrictions came into force. From the top of Mount Dora you can see the border area with outposts along either side. You can just about see the Joint Security Zone, the famous compound where officials from the North and the UN can meet. And more notoriously, you can see the rival flagpoles of the villages of Deoksugung and Cheonggyecheon. For several years, the North and South were in a rivalry as to who had the taller flagpole. However, the UN commander ordered a stop to this pettiness by the South once they had reached 100 metres. The North were not up for stopping, so erected this 160 metre tall flagpole, which was the tallest in the world for over a decade. It is now only the 9th tallest in the world, which North Koreans seem to have ignored. The village behind it is one of the infamous propaganda villages, and the general scenery of North Korea presented to the DMZ tourists does look shockingly ordinary, even down to seeing people in the distance cycling along the lanes. Just going about their day. It all looks as ordinary as it can, if you gloss over the military installations in the foreground of your view. Having seen the shockingly ordinary land of North Korea, our guide then pointed out that within the view that we had seen, there were likely dozens of hidden artillery emplacements pointed right at us. So, that's comforting. For some reason, he never said how many the South have facing north, though he did definitely pass some of those. The next stop was at the base of Mount Dora, just a few hundred meters from the border. The timing was perfect as it had started snowing, meaning that those at the observatory would barely get to see as far as us, not to mind Kaesong over the border. This was the third infiltration tunnel, one of several invasion tunnels that had been uncovered during the years. It was dug to allow North Korean forces to infiltrate into the south in the event of an invasion, though it was discovered by the South, who sealed the tunnel at the border. It is now open for lines of tourists to bang their hard hats along the roof to the barricade at the end, where a tiny window lets you look into the darkness across towards the north. Apparently I was really upset about the false advertising of the tunnel site, as we'll go on with it here.
Just to be clear, it is nowhere near as high. The top of the scaffold's about shoulder height on most people, so don't be fooled by this. That's about actual size. Up to here is all about actual size, and no. You will hit your head. You need a helmet. It's not exaggeration. I guess they put this here to show you what the tunnel's like when you can actually take photos. Yeah, actual tunnel, about that high. Not like this. Much lower than that when you actually get into it. Also, that's not painted green, but it does have barbed wire, which is interesting. The tunnel also features an exhibit space with some of the history of the tunnel and the various incidents along the DMZ. And after all of that, like any good theme park ride, we finished up at the gift shop. This would probably be nicer on a day when the snow didn't come in, but good thing we got to the observatory early, as we were probably literally sort of amongst the last people who actually got to see anything today. Anyway, Unification Village. It's indeed a Korean village that happens to have a cafe and souvenir shop to service all the tour groups passing through. I mean, it probably makes more sense to put it here than actually near the military zone itself, which is off over yonder, that direction. Yeah, as the tour guides described it, like when it came to like the third infiltration tunnel, the North Koreans kindly dug the South Korean government a nice tourist attraction that they've been profiting off ever since they discovered it. So he said, well, that's capitalism for you. That's the difference between the two sides of the border, isn't it? Yeah. Very interesting. Probably the most touristy thing I've done in a while, but it feels like you kind of need to do it. Just confirm yourself, like, oh yeah, that is a real place over there, and this place is actually like this. Even if, to be honest, most of the interesting stuff I cannot show on video, because I don't want to get arrested. Which is, yeah, interesting. It really is. I'm not sure I want to have any more deeper thoughts in it, because I'll probably lose my mind. Moving on without losing our mind, our tour bus dropped us back in a now wet and miserable Seoul, which was perfect weather to continue our day of depressing history, with another site of atrocities. As it was closed yesterday, I would now get to visit the Seodaemun Prison. This notorious prison was one of the largest in the prison system established by the Japanese, and during their occupation imprisoned over 65,000 political prisoners. Its design is based on British prisons, who are often an inspiration for the Japanese. After an exhibit on the prison's history, the tour route leads you through the torture chambers where independence activists were interrogated, though they ask you don't take photos of these rooms, as in this basement many of the prisoners would be killed by the horrific brutality of their captors. The cell blocks have information on notable prisoners of the independence movement, though unfortunately most of this is in Korean. As you explore the yard and the ancillary buildings, you eventually come to the execution building, where the Japanese executed 165 independence activists during their occupation. Usually the bodies were piled up in a tunnel leading from this building to hide the evidence of the torture from the public. While comprehensive on the prison's history during occupation, it seems the remaining decades of the prison's history after 1945 get scant mention, which includes North Korean massacres on this site where they killed even more people than the Japanese, and of how political prisoners will be held here by the Korean government, who were also accused of torturing them, right up to the prison's closure in 1987. I guess some parts of history are still too inconvenient. And on that delightful note led us to the end of our last day in Seoul, which was finished off by a pork cutlet which was way too spicy for its own good but was still excellent. And the next morning I would be off to Tokyo to continue the adventure in Japan. Today in airport shenanigans, I guess because I had to be checked in manually because I'm weird in my itinerary passport or some sort of combination, I had to go into that queue. But really isn't that bad, it was all like 3 minutes. Compared to if I checked in online, I'd still be queuing to drop my bag off, so that doesn't really seem faster. Sometimes the old ways just work out. And it really shouldn't work like that. However, that is not the end of the story, as I would be flying home from Seoul, rather than directly from Sapporo. So I had a bonus evening in Seoul about a week later. I would probably strongly discourage you from transiting through Incheon overnight in the style that I'm doing. At least make a few days out of your transit. If you do need a place, Mr. Kim guest house there pretty cheap and quite nice looking, and owned by friendly people. And you are only 2 stops from Incheon Terminal 1 on the Airport Express. Well, not the Airport Express, the local train. Don't take the express, you'll end up in Seoul, which is, quite a bit away from here, so don't do that. But no, ideal location, especially if you don't care about going into Seoul itself, which is the exact opposite of what I'm doing, because I also want to burn, I have time, and I still have 1 ticket left for one of the royal palaces. That's open till 9 tonight, so plenty of time to make my way in there. At least get full value out of the £3 I spent on that combined ticket.
I'm never one for missing out on value, so back we went to Seoul to visit the last royal palace we had missed. Ironically, it was the one closest to where I had been staying before, near City Hall. Deoksugung Palace was originally built as a temporary palace, after the others had been destroyed by a Japanese invasion in 1592. It was always a secondary palace to the others until 1897, when the now Emperor Gojong declared the formation of the Korean Empire and used this palace as his imperial court. During this time it would be modernised and even had Western style buildings added for his new residence and banquet hall, which I found quite interesting.
So while definitely a British style Western building by a British architect, it still has this outdoor passageway connecting the 2 buildings, even though the second building over there came about in the 30s, but yeah, still a very Korean feature you wouldn't necessarily see in a UK building, which is very interesting to see.
As is a typical story at this point, during Japanese occupation, much of the palace was destroyed and some buildings were repurposed, though the restoration continues to restore the original and historic appearance of the palace. While the Museum of the Korean Empire and the Art Museum that are on this site were closed by the time I got here, it was still worth a visit though. Obviously, if you can, come earlier to get to see all the exhibits on site. And then, with one last visit to Labap for some fried dumplings, chicken and Teokbokki, we were now actually finished in Seoul, and had a slightly better airport experience the next day.
So in complete contrast to flying out here last week, the Asiana self-check-in, self-drop, not only did it work for me, very, very quick and excellent. So, all done here in less than 10 minutes, and, well, onwards to security and a flight home.
So, that was a few days in Seoul. Usually when I spend more than 2 days in a place, I nearly feel like I'm overstaying my welcome. Seoul surprised me in that I could easily come back here for another few days, before probably heading south to explore more Korea. I loved the food, the history was fascinating, and despite being on the other side of the world and I didn't even have the ability to read the language, not to mind understand it, and as you've heard in the last 40 minutes, I cannot even pronounce Korean when it's written out for me in English, I was still very comfortable and welcomed here. But it felt like I would in most places in Europe. I can definitely see how Korea will become the next trend in long-haul travel once everyone has ticked Japan off their list, and I'm all for it. Now, I need to work out a way to come back here at some point.